The deep space monitoring station on the edge of the Vanthi Empire had not seen any real action in over 300 years. It floated silently in the cold darkness between two dying stars, its sensors always watching, always listening, but never finding anything worth reporting. The officers stationed there considered it a punishment. Nothing ever happened at the edge of the Empire. Nothing was supposed to happen. So when the alarm went off, at exactly 3:30 cycle, every single officer on the station froze in place. The sound was sharp and loud, and none of them had ever heard it before in real life. They had only heard it in training simulations. It was the sound that meant something had entered Vanthi space without permission. Officer Wren, a tall and thin Vanthi, with gray skin and 4 narrow eyes, rushed to the main screen. His long fingers moved fast across the controls. The data came flooding in, and none of it made any sense to him. There was a single ship. Just one. It had crossed the border like it was nothing. No cloaking. No attempt to hide. It was just flying straight through, as if it had every right to be there. "What species?" asked his commander from across the room. Wren checked the readings 3 times. He checked them a 4th time, because he did not believe what he was seeing. His mouth opened, but the word did not come out right away. He swallowed hard and tried again. "Human," he said. The room went very quiet. Humans were not supposed to be here. Humans were not supposed to be anywhere near Vanthi space. The Vanthi Empire stretched across 900 star systems. They had the largest fleet in the known galaxy. They had conquered dozens of species over thousands of years. They were the power that others feared. And humans were a small species from a small planet at the far end of the galaxy. They had only been traveling among the stars for a few hundred years. They were considered young, unimportant, and not worth thinking about. But there were stories. Wren had heard them. Everyone had heard them. Stories about what happened to the Droxy Collective when they tried to enslave a human colony. Stories about what happened to the Fenari Raiders when they attacked a human cargo ship. Stories that were always told in whispers and never confirmed by any official source. The Vanthi government said these stories were lies and propaganda. Wren had always believed his government. But now, a human ship was flying through their space, and it was not hiding, and it was not afraid, and Wren felt something cold move through his body. The commander sent the report to the Imperial fleet immediately. It traveled faster than light through the communication relays, and reached the central command station in less than a minute. Admiral Tovin received it while he was eating his morning meal. He read it once, put down his food, and read it again. "One ship," he said to himself. "Just one." He stood up and walked to the command bridge. His officers straightened up when they saw his face. Tovin was old by Vanthi standards. He had served in the fleet for 60 years. He had fought in 3 wars and won all of them. He was not a nervous person. But the look on his face made everyone in the room feel uneasy. "Show me the ship," he said. They brought up the long-range scans on the main display. The ship was not very large by Vanthi standards. It was maybe half the size of a standard Vanthi cruiser. It was dark gray, almost black, and it had a shape that was hard to describe. It was not smooth and elegant like Vanthi ships. It was not curved and organic like Fenari ships. It was blocky and heavy, and covered in strange angles. It looked like something that had been built not to be beautiful, but to survive anything. The name on the side of the ship was written in the human language. The translation system converted it quickly. ISS Hwarang. "What do we know about this class of ship?" Tovin asked. His intelligence officer, a young female named Pren, pulled up everything they had. It was not much. The humans did not share information about their military. No one had ever captured a human warship. No one had ever gotten close enough to scan one properly. All they had were estimates and guesses. "It appears to be what the humans call a heavy destroyer," Pren said. Beyond that, we have very little confirmed data. Tovin stared at the image of the ship on the screen. It was just sitting there, in Vanthi space, moving at a steady speed, heading deeper into their territory. It had not responded to any automated warnings. It had not changed course. It was just flying forward like the entire Vanthi Empire was not even there. Far away, on the bridge of the ISS Hwarong, Captain Han Do-hyun was having a very ordinary morning. He sat in his captain's chair, with his legs crossed, and a cup of hot barley tea in his hand. The bridge was calm. The lights were soft. Someone had put on quiet music in the background, something old and gentle from Earth. Do-hyun was a man of average height, with a round face and tired eyes. He was 43 years old, and he had been in the human defense fleet for 20 of those years. He did not look like the kind of man who would make an entire empire nervous. He looked like the kind of man who would fall asleep on a park bench on a Sunday afternoon. His first officer, Yoon Nari, walked up beside him and handed him a data tablet. She was younger than him by 10 years, sharp in every way. Sharp eyes, sharp mind, sharp tongue. She had short black hair, and she never smiled unless something was about to explode. "We have been detected," she said. "The Vanthi border station has sent a report to their fleet command." Do-hyun took a slow sip of his tea. "How many ships do you think they will send?" Nari thought about it. For one human ship in their space, they will probably send at least 30 or 40. They like to show strength in numbers. Do-hyun nodded slowly. "That sounds about right." "Should we change course?" Nari asked. She already knew the answer, but she asked anyway because it was her job. "No," Do-hyun said. "We go straight through. That is the mission." Nari gave a small nod and walked back to her station. She was not worried. None of the crew was worried. They had all been briefed before the mission. They knew where they were going, and why. They knew the Vanthi would not be happy to see them. But the crew of the Hwarong had served together for a long time. They had been through things that would make most species lose their minds. They trusted their ship. They trusted their captain. And they trusted that when the time came, they would do what humans had always done when the galaxy tried to push them around. They would push back. Do-hyun finished his tea and set the cup down gently on the arm of his chair. He looked at the stars on the main screen. Somewhere out there, an empire was starting to panic. He could almost feel it. "Steady as she goes," he said quietly. Admiral Tovin did not waste time. Within one cycle of receiving the border station report, he had assembled a strike fleet of 42 warships. 12 of them were heavy cruisers, the pride of the Vanthi Navy. Each one was nearly 4 times the size of the human ship. The rest were a mix of destroyers, frigates, and interceptors. Together they carried enough firepower to burn the surface of a planet clean. Tovin stood at the center of his flagship, the Imperial Blade, and watched as his fleet moved into formation. The ship spread out in a wide arc, designed to surround the human vessel from all sides. It was the standard Vanthi approach. Overwhelming force, total encirclement, no escape. It had worked against every species they had ever faced. His officers moved around him with focused energy. They were well-trained and disciplined, but Tovin could see something in their eyes that he did not like. It was not fear exactly. It was something close to it. It was uncertainty. None of them had ever faced a human ship before. None of them knew what to expect. And the stories, the ones that the government said were not real, were sitting in the back of every mind on that bridge. Tovin pushed those thoughts aside. He was an admiral. He had a job to do. One small ship had entered Vanthi space without permission, and it needed to be stopped. The fleet reached the intercept point in less than half a cycle. The human ship was right where they expected it to be. It had not changed speed, it had not changed direction, it had not done anything at all. It was just moving forward in a perfectly straight line. Tovin studied the ship on his screen. Up close, it looked even stranger than the long-range images had shown. The hull was covered in thick plates of some dark material that the Vanthi scanners could not fully read. There were no visible windows, no decorative markings, no lights, except for a few small ones near what appeared to be the engine section. The whole thing looked heavy and solid, like a fist made of metal. "Open a communication channel," Tovin ordered. His communications officer did so immediately. A moment passed, then another. Then a voice came through the speakers. It was calm and clear, and speaking in the common galactic trade language. "This is Captain Han Do-hyun of the ISS Hwarong, Human Defense Fleet. Go ahead." Tovin straightened his back. "Human vessel, you have entered the sovereign territory of the Vanthi Empire without authorization. This is a serious violation of galactic law. You are ordered to stop your engines immediately, lower your shields, and prepare to be boarded. If you do not follow these instructions, we will use force." There was a pause. It lasted about 3 seconds, but it felt much longer. Then the voice came back. It was still calm. If anything, it sounded slightly amused. "Thank you for the message, Admiral. Please hold for a moment." The channel did not close, but there was no more talking. Tovin frowned. He looked at his officers. They looked back at him with confused faces. No species had ever told a Vanthi admiral to hold before. It was so unexpected that no one knew how to react. On the bridge of the Hwarong, Do-hyun had muted the channel and turned to look at Nari. She was leaning against her console with her arms crossed. Behind her, the rest of the bridge crew were at their stations, relaxed and quiet. 42 ships, Nari said, reading her display. 12 heavy cruisers. The rest are smaller. That is more than I expected, Do-hyun said. He did not sound worried. He sounded like a man who had just been told the restaurant was out of his favorite dish. They want us to stop engines and lower shields, Nari said. And they want to board us. Do-hyun raised an eyebrow. Board us? That is what the Admiral said. Do-hyun looked around his bridge. Weapons Officer Baek Jisoo was sitting at his station, a tall and quiet man with big hands and a face that never showed much emotion. Navigation Officer Park So-min was at her post, a small woman with round glasses who could calculate a jump route faster than the ship's computer. Engineer Kwon Tae-sun was monitoring the engine systems from his station in the back. A heavy-set man who loved the Hwarong's engines more than most people loved their families. They were all looking at Do-hyun. None of them looked afraid. A few of them looked like they were trying not to smile. Do-hyun unmuted the channel. "Admiral, this is Captain Do-hyun again. I appreciate the warm welcome. However, I must respectfully decline your request. We are on a scheduled transit through this region of space. We have no hostile intentions. We will be out of your territory within a few cycles. I suggest you let us pass." Tovin's face turned a darker shade of gray. In 60 years of service, no one had ever respectfully declined an order from him. His officers on the bridge were staring at the speakers as if the speakers had just insulted their mothers. "Human Captain," Tovin said, his voice tight and controlled, "you do not seem to understand the situation. You are surrounded by 42 warships. You are alone. You have no support. You are deep inside our territory with no way out. This is not a request. This is a command. Shut down your engines and prepare to be boarded. You have 100 heartbeats to comply." On the Hwarong, Nari looked at Do-hyun. 100 heartbeats, that is very dramatic. The Vanthi do love their drama, Do-hyun agreed. He stood up from his chair slowly and stretched his back. He walked to the front of the bridge and looked at the main screen. The Vanthi fleet was arranged all around them in a perfect circle. The ships were large and impressive, covered in bright lights and sharp angles. They looked like they belonged in a painting. They were clearly designed, to make other species feel small and afraid. Do-hyun did not feel small. He did not feel afraid. He had been in the human defense fleet for 20 years. He had served on the border when the Droxy tried to take the Kepler colonies. He had been at the Battle of Red Drift when 3 human frigates held off an entire pirate armada for 6 hours until reinforcements arrived. He had seen what human ships could do when they had to fight. And the Hwaron was no ordinary ship. It was a Gyeobuk-son-class heavy destroyer, named after the old turtle ships of Korean history. It was built in the orbital shipyards above Earth, specifically for missions like this. Missions where one ship had to go somewhere dangerous, alone, and come back in one piece. Every system on the Hwaron was designed for survival. The shields were layered 4 deep. The hull was made of a composite material that could absorb and redirect energy. The engines were powerful enough to outrun anything in the Vanthi fleet. And the weapons were something that the Vanthi had never seen before, and Do-hyun hoped they would not have to see today. He turned back to his crew. "Nari, open the channel again." She did. "Admiral Tovin," Do-hyun said. His voice was still calm, but there was something new in it now. Something steady and firm, like the foundation of a building. "I understand you have your orders. I understand you believe you are in a position of strength. But I am going to be very honest with you, because I think honesty is important. We are not going to stop. We are not going to lower our shields, and no one is going to board this ship. We are going to keep flying in a straight line until we leave your space. You can let us pass peacefully, and this will just be a strange story you tell over drinks. Or you can try to stop us." He paused. "I strongly suggest you let us pass." The channel went quiet. On the Imperial blade, Tovin stood completely still. His hands were behind his back, and his 4 eyes were locked on the display showing the human ship. It was just sitting there inside his fleet, surrounded on all sides, and its captain was talking to him like he was the one in danger. Tovin had served for 60 years. He had never retreated. He had never backed down. He was not going to start now. "All ships," Tovin said, his voice cold and hard. "Prepare to fire on my command." The fleet powered up its weapons. Hundreds of gun ports opened across 42 ships. The space around the Hwaron filled with the hum of energy building to deadly levels. On the Hwaron, Jisoo looked at his weapons console. Small lights were blinking. He looked up at Do-hyun. "They are charging weapons, Captain." Do-hyun sat back down in his chair. He picked up his cup of tea and took a sip. It had gone cold, but he drank it anyway. Admiral Tovin gave the order, and the galaxy lit up. 42 ships fired at the same time. Plasma bolts, particle beams, energy torpedoes, and kinetic rounds poured through space like a river of light and death. The firepower was enormous. It was enough to crack the crust of a small moon. It was enough to turn a city into dust. Every gun on every ship was pointed at one target, and every gun fired at once. The space around the Hwaron became a wall of bright burning light. The sensors on the Vanthi ships went white. For a few seconds, no one could see anything. The energy readings went off the charts. Officers on the Imperial blade shielded their eyes from the brightness of their own screens. Tovin stood with his hands clasped behind his back and waited. He had seen this kind of firepower used before. He had watched it melt warships into floating metal. He had watched it turn asteroids into gravel. Nothing survived a full fleet barrage. Nothing. The light faded. The energy cleared. The sensors came back online. The Hwaron was still there. It had not moved. It had not changed course. It had not even slowed down. It was still flying in the exact same direction at the exact same speed, as if nothing had happened at all. Tovin felt his blood go cold. "Report," he said. His voice was steady, but his hearts were beating faster than they should have been. His tactical officer stared at the readings. His hands were shaking. "Direct hits from all 42 ships, Admiral. Full impact confirmed across all weapon types. The human ship's shields are... He paused and checked the data again. The human ship's shields are still at full strength. The bridge went silent. Tovin could hear the hum of the ship's systems. He could hear the breathing of his officers. He could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. "That is not possible," he said quietly. "The data is confirmed, Admiral. Their shields absorbed everything. There is no visible damage." Tovin turned to his science officer. "Explain this to me." The science officer, an older Vanthi named Sorvin, who had spent his entire career studying alien technology, looked like he had just seen something that broke every rule he had ever learned. His 4 eyes blinked rapidly as he stared at his console. "The shield technology is unlike anything in our database," Sorvin said slowly. "It appears to operate on a layered principle. Multiple shield frequencies stacked on top of each other, each one tuned to absorb a different type of energy. When one layer absorbs an incoming attack, the energy is redirected and distributed across the other layers. In simple terms, Admiral, our weapons are feeding their shields." Tovin did not respond for a long moment. He just stood there, processing what he had been told. His entire fleet had just fired everything they had at a single ship. And not only had it survived, but it had actually gotten stronger from the attack. On the bridge of the Huarong, the mood had not changed. There was no panic. There was no excitement. There was nothing but quiet professionalism and the soft sound of the background music that someone had forgotten to turn off. Baek Jisoo had watched the entire attack on his display. His screens showed the energy readings from every Vanthi weapon that had hit the shields. He studied the data the way a doctor studies a patient's chart. "Shield integrity is holding at 100%, he said. "Energy absorption is within normal parameters. The outer layer took most of the plasma fire. The second layer handled the particle beams. The kinetic rounds were deflected by the tertiary barrier. Everything is working as designed." He was still sitting in his chair. He had not moved during the entire attack. His empty teacup was still balanced on the arm of his chair, and it had not fallen. That was how little the ship had shaken. The answer was not at all. Nari checked her communications console. "The Vanthi fleet is not sending any new messages. I think they are confused. They just hit us with everything they have and nothing happened," Park Soman said from her navigation station. She adjusted her round glasses and looked at her captain. "I would be confused too." Do Yun allowed himself a small smile. "Give them a moment. They will try again." He was right. On the Imperial Blade, Tovin had recovered from his shock and was already giving new orders. He was not a man who gave up easily. 60 years of service had taught him that every problem had a solution. Every shield had a weakness. Every enemy had a flaw. "All ships, switch to rotating frequencies," he ordered. "Stagger the fire. Hit them with different weapon types in sequence. Find the gaps in their shield layers." The fleet adjusted and fired again. This time, the attack was more organized. Plasma first, then particle beams, then kinetic rounds, then energy torpedoes. Each wave was designed to test a different part of the human ship's defense. On the Huarong, Jisoo watched the new attack pattern with interest. "They are trying to find holes in our shield frequencies," he said. "Smart approach." "Will it work?" Do-hyun asked, though he already knew the answer. "No," Jisoo said simply. "The shield system adapts faster than they can change frequencies. They would need to be about 10,000 times faster to have any chance." The second barrage hit. The shields held. Not a single shot reached the hull. Tovin ordered a third attack. This time, he had his ships focus all their fire on a single point on the human ship's hull, hoping to overwhelm one section of the shields with concentrated force. The result was the same. The shields held. The Huarong kept flying. A fourth attack. A fifth. Each time the Vanthi tried something different. Each time it failed. Engineer Kwon Tae-sun called the bridge from the engine room. His voice was relaxed and he sounded slightly bored. "Captain, is something hitting the ship? I am seeing small energy readings on the outer sensors, but they are so low I was not sure if it was the shields or just space dust." Nari covered her mouth to hide her smile. Do-hyun shook his head slowly. "It is the Vanthi fleet," Do-hyun said. "They are shooting at us." There was a pause on the other end. "Oh," Tae-sun said. "Should I do something?" "No, just keep the engines running." "Yes, Captain." Somin let out a small laugh that she quickly turned into a cough. Even Jisoo, who almost never showed emotion, had a slight curve at the corner of his mouth. Outside, the Vanthi fleet had stopped firing. They had used an enormous amount of energy and accomplished nothing. Several of the smaller ships were reporting that their weapon systems needed time to cool down. The heavy cruisers still had power, but the crews inside them were shaken. They had never failed to destroy a target before. They did not know how to process what was happening. On the Imperial Blade, Tovin stood alone at the front of the bridge. His officers were quiet behind him.
No one wanted to speak. No one wanted to be the one to say what everyone was thinking. The stories were true.
Everything they had been told about humans being a weak and unimportant species was wrong. The government had lied, or the government had not known. Either way, the truth was right in front of them, flying through their space in a straight line, completely untouched. Tovin thought about his options. He could call for more ships. He could request the super-heavy battleships from the core systems. But if 42 ships could not scratch this one vessel, what would more ships accomplish? Would 100 ships do any better? Would 1,000? And there was another thought in his mind now. A darker thought. A thought that made his old bones feel cold. This was one human ship. One. The humans had a fleet. No one knew how large it was, because the humans did not share that information. But if every ship in their fleet was like this one, then the balance of power in the galaxy was not what anyone thought it was. It had never been what anyone thought it was. Tovin realized that the human captain had been telling the truth. He really was just passing through. If the Hwarong had wanted to fight, it would have fired back by now. It had not fired a single shot. It had just taken everything the Vanthi fleet could throw at it and kept going. That was not the behavior of a warship looking for a fight. That was the behavior of something so powerful that it did not consider the Vanthi fleet to be a threat worth responding to. And that, Tovin thought, was the most terrifying thing of all. The Hwarong flew on, steady, silent, untouched, and on its bridge, Captain Han Do-hyun asked if anyone wanted more tea. The silence after the last barrage was the loudest thing Admiral Tovin had ever heard. His fleet hung in space around the human ship like a ring of broken pride. Weapon systems were cooling, energy reserves were low on the smaller ships, and the Hwarong was still moving forward, still on its straight line, still completely undamaged. Tovin's communications officer spoke up from behind him. "Admiral, the Imperial Council is requesting a direct report. They want to know why a single human ship is still in our territory." Tovin closed his 4 eyes for a moment. The Imperial Council, 5 old politicians sitting in a room on the homeworld, hundreds of light years away, who had never been on a warship in their lives. They wanted to know why, as if the answer was simple, as if he had not just thrown everything he had at this ship, and watched it all disappear into those impossible shields. "Tell the council that the situation is ongoing," Tovin said. "Tell them I am handling it." But he was not handling it. He knew that. His officers knew that. And somewhere on the bridge of that dark gray human ship, the human captain knew it too. Tovin made a decision. If weapons could not stop the Hwarang, then perhaps strategy could. He ordered his fleet to reposition. 10 ships moved ahead of the human vessel and formed a wall directly in its path. They did not fire. They just sat there, blocking the way forward. It was a simple tactic. If you could not destroy something, you could stand in its way. On the Farang, Soman was the first to notice. Captain, 10 Vanthi ships have moved into our flight path. They are forming a blockade approximately 200 kilometers ahead. Do-hyun looked at the screen. The 10 ships were arranged in a tight line, overlapping their shields to create a single barrier. It was not a bad idea. It showed that the Vanthi admiral was thinking, adapting, trying new approaches. Do-hyun respected that. They want to see if we will change course, Nari said. Yes, Do-hyun agreed. Or if we will stop. Will we? No. Nari nodded and looked at Soman. Keep our heading, same speed. The Hwarang continued forward. The distance to the blockade closed. 150 kilometers. 100. 75. 50. On the lead Vanthi blockade ship, the captain watched the human vessel approaching. It was not slowing down. It was not turning. It was heading straight for them, at full speed, and it showed no sign of stopping. The captain gripped the arms of his chair and felt sweat forming on his gray skin. 30 kilometers. 20. 15. The Vanthi captain broke. He ordered his ship to move aside. The ship next to him did the same. Within seconds, all 10 ships in the blockade scattered like birds frightened by a loud noise. They pulled away in different directions, their engines burning bright as they scrambled to get out of the path of the oncoming human ship. The Hwarang flew through the gap where the blockade had been, without changing speed by even a fraction. On the Imperial blade, Tovin watched his blockade fall apart and said nothing. His jaw was tight. His hands were clenched behind his back so hard that his knuckles had turned white. He had given those captains no order to move. They had broken formation on their own. They had panicked. And he could not blame them, because if a ship that had survived everything his fleet could throw at it was flying straight at him with no intention of stopping, he was not sure he would have stayed in its path either. Tovin understood now that he was not going to stop this ship. Not with weapons, not with blockades, not with anything he had available to him. The human ship was going to fly through Vanthi space, and there was nothing he could do about it. But understanding something and accepting it were two different things. Admiral, his tactical officer said carefully, the human ship still has not fired a single weapon. Their gun ports remain closed. They have made no aggressive moves. Tovin heard the words, but they did not make him feel better. If anything, they made him feel worse. A ship that fights back is an enemy you can understand. A ship that does not even bother to fight back is something else entirely. It is a statement. It is a message. And the message was clear. You are not a threat to us. You are not even worth our attention. Tovin opened a channel to the Hwarang. Human captain. Do-hyun was standing at the front of his bridge, watching the stars. He turned slightly when the channel opened. Admiral, I am still here. Why are you in our space? The anger was gone from his voice now. What remained was something raw and honest. It was the voice of a man who needed an answer. Do-hyun considered the question. He looked at Nari. She gave him a small nod that meant it was his call. He looked at Jisoo, who was sitting at his station with his arms crossed, calm as always. He looked at Soman, who was watching him through her round glasses. He looked at the stars on the screen. There is a species on the other side of your territory, Do-hyun said. They are called the Kessi. They are small. Their planet is mostly ocean. They have no military. 2 of their colony worlds are dying because a plague has destroyed their food supply. They sent a distress signal 3 weeks ago. No one answered. He paused. No one except us. Tovin felt something shift inside him. He had heard about the Kessi plague. It had been mentioned in an intelligence briefing weeks ago. The Vanthi government had decided it was not their problem. The Kessi were not allies. They were not trade partners. They were a minor species in a quiet part of the galaxy, and their suffering did not affect Vanthi interests. You are crossing our entire territory to deliver aid to the Kessi? Tovin said slowly. Yes. You could have gone around. Going around would have taken 11 more days. The Kessi do not have 11 days. Their children are already dying. The bridge of the Imperial Blade was completely still. Every officer had heard the exchange. Every officer was looking at their admiral. Tovin could feel their eyes on him. He thought about the Kessi, a small species, mostly ocean, no military, children dying of starvation because a plague had killed their crops. And the only people in the entire galaxy who had answered their call for help were the humans. Not the Vanthi Empire with its 900 star systems. Not the Fenari Federation with its vast trade networks. Not any of the great powers that claim to stand for order and civilization. A single human warship, flying through hostile territory, taking fire from 42 ships without flinching, all to bring food and medicine to a species most of the galaxy had never heard of. Tovin closed his eyes. Do-hyun spoke again. Admiral, I am not your enemy. I do not want to be your enemy. But I am going to reach the Kessi, and I am going to deliver the supplies in my cargo hold. Nothing is going to stop me. Not your fleet, not your empire. Nothing. His voice was not threatening. It was not angry. It was just certain. It was the voice of a man who had made a promise and intended to keep it no matter what stood in his way. However, Do-hyun continued, I would prefer to pass through your space peacefully. No more shooting. No more blockades. Just let me through and I will be gone. Your empire will never know I was here. Tovin opened his eyes. He looked at the image of the Hwarang on his screen. That dark, heavy, impossible ship. He thought about 60 years of service. He thought about duty and honor and what those words actually meant. Then he did something that surprised everyone on his bridge, including himself. He gave the order. All ships, stand down. Pull back to standard patrol distance. Let the human ship pass. His officers looked at him with wide eyes. Some of them opened their mouths to speak. Tovin raised a hand, and they went silent. But Admiral, his tactical officer whispered, the Council. I will deal with the Council, Tovin said. Stand down. The fleet began to pull back. Ships moved aside, opening a clear path through Vanthi space. The ring of warships that had surrounded the Hwarang dissolved like mist in the morning sun. On the Hwarang, Nari watched the Vanthi fleet withdrawing on her display. Her eyebrows went up slightly. They are standing down. Do-hyun sat back in his chair. Good. I did not expect that, Nari admitted. Do-hyun looked at the screen where the Vanthi ships were moving away. The Admiral is a good man, he said quietly. He just needed a reason to do the right thing. Nari looked at him for a moment. Then she turned back to her console. Course is clear. Estimated time to Kessi space is 14 hours. Then let us not waste any more time, Do-hyun said. The Hwarang picked up speed and flew forward through the gap in the Vanthi fleet. It passed the Imperial Blade close enough that officers on both ships could see each other through their sensors. For a brief moment, Admiral Tovin and Captain Do-hyun existed in the same small piece of space. Then the Hwarang was passed, and it was gone, flying deeper into Vanthi territory, on its way to save a species it had no obligation to save. Tovin watched it go. He stood at the front of his bridge for a long time after the human ship had disappeared from his sensors. What are humans? He muttered to himself. No one on his bridge had an answer. The Hwarang reached Kessi space in exactly 14 hours, just as Somin had calculated. The ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel, and the bridge crew got their first look at the Kessi homeworld through the main screen. It was a beautiful planet, blue and green and silver, covered in vast oceans with chains of small islands scattered across its surface like drops of paint on glass. But the beauty was only on the surface. The orbital stations around the planet were dark. Most of them had lost power weeks ago. Emergency beacons blinked weakly from dozens of locations across the system. Small Kessi ships drifted without direction, their engines cold, their crews too weak to fly them properly. The plague had not just killed the crops, it had killed hope. Do-hyun stood up from his chair and walked to the front of the bridge. He looked at the planet for a long moment. Then he looked at his crew. Nari, open all channels, broadcast on every frequency. Nari did it without hesitation. Her fingers moved across her console, and within seconds, the Hwaron was transmitting to every receiver in the Kessi system. Do-hyun spoke clearly. This is Captain Han Do-hyun of the ISS Hwarong, Human Defense Fleet. We received your distress signal. We are here to help. We are carrying food supplies, seeds, water purification equipment, and medical supplies. Please direct us to where the need is greatest. The response was not immediate. For a long 30 seconds, there was nothing. Then a voice came through. It was thin and weak and trembling, speaking in the galactic trade language with an accent that made the words sound like water flowing over stones. Human ship, this is Kessi's Central Authority. We did not think anyone was coming. We are here now, Do-hyun said. Tell us where to go. The next several hours were the busiest the crew of the Hwarong had experienced in a long time. The cargo hold of the ship was massive for a vessel of its size. The humans had designed the Gyeobukson-class destroyers with large internal storage, because they understood something that many other species did not. A warship that could only fight was only half useful. A warship that could fight and also carry enough supplies to save a civilization was something else entirely. Nari organized the distribution with military precision. She set up supply drops at 7 locations across the planet and its 2 colony worlds. Each drop was carefully planned to reach the areas where the food shortage was most severe. She worked with the Kessi authorities, what was left of them, to coordinate landing zones and distribution points. Jisoo, who had spent the entire encounter with the Vanthi fleet sitting calmly at his weapons station, now used those same tactical skills to plan the fastest and most efficient delivery routes. He calculated approach vectors and landing windows with the same focus he would have used for a battle. In a way, it was a battle against time and hunger and despair. Somin flew the Hwarang with gentle precision, bringing the heavy warship into the atmosphere of the Kessi homeworld with a softness that seemed impossible for a ship of its size. The Kessi who watched from the ground saw a dark shape descend through their clouds, a ship that looked like it had been built for war, landing in their fields to give them food. Some of them could not believe it was real. Taesoon led the engineering team in setting up the water purification systems. He worked for 6 hours straight without rest, connecting equipment, testing systems, and training Kessi engineers on how to maintain everything after the humans were gone. He was patient and kind, and he explained everything in simple terms that anyone could understand. When a young Kessi engineer thanked him, Taesoon just shrugged his big shoulders and said it was nothing. Do-hyun himself went down to the surface. He walked through the Kessi settlements and saw the damage that the plague had caused. The fields were brown and dead. The storage buildings were empty. The people were thin and tired and scared. But they were alive, and now they had food and clean water and medicine, and most importantly, they had proof that someone in the galaxy cared enough to come. A Kessi elder approached Do-hyun near one of the supply distribution points. The elder was small, barely reaching Do-hyun's chest, with smooth blue-gray skin and large dark eyes that reflected the light like the surface of the ocean. The elder moved slowly, supported by a younger Kessi who held the older one's arm with great care. "Why did you come?" the elder asked. The voice was soft, but the question was serious. "We are nothing to the galaxy. We have no resources. We have no military. We have nothing to offer you. Why did you come?" Do-hyun looked at the elder. He thought about the question. It was the same question Tovin had asked, in a different way. It was the question the whole galaxy seemed to be asking. Why would humans risk a ship, cross hostile territory, and spend resources on a species that could offer nothing in return? Because you asked for help, Do-hyun said. That was enough. The elders stared at him for a long time. Then the elder reached out and took Do-hyun's hand. The elder's fingers were thin and cool, and they trembled slightly. But the grip was strong. We will not forget this, the elder said. For as long as our people exist, we will not forget. Do-hyun nodded and held the elder's hand gently. He did not say anything else. There was nothing else to say. When the supply distribution was complete, and the water purification systems were running, and the medical teams had treated the worst cases of malnutrition and disease, Do-hyun returned to the Warong. The crew was tired, but satisfied. They had done what they came to do. Nari met him at the bridge door. All supplies delivered. Water systems operational on all 3 worlds. Medical teams report that the worst cases are stabilized. The seed stocks should allow the Kessi to restart food production within 2 growth cycles. Good work, Do-hyun said. Good work. He sat down in his chair and looked at the Kessi homeworld on the screen one last time. Then he gave the order to leave. But before the Hwarong jumped to faster-than-light speed, Do-hyun did one more thing. He opened a wideband broadcast. Not just to the Kessi system, not just to Vanthi space, he broadcast on every major galactic frequency. The kind of signal that would be received by every civilization with a receiver within 1,000 light-years. This is Captain Han Do-hyun of the ISS Hwarong, Human Defense Fleet. I am broadcasting this message on open channels so that anyone who wishes to hear it may hear it. He paused for a moment. Nari looked at him. Jisoo looked at him. Sumin and Taesun and every member of the bridge crew looked at him. They knew this moment had been planned. They knew what their captain was about to say. It was the real reason the mission had been sent through Vanthi space instead of around it. It was the real message. 3 weeks ago, the Kessi people sent a distress signal to the galaxy. They were dying. Their crops had failed. Their children were starving. They asked for help. Do-hyun's voice was steady and calm, the same way it had been when Tovin pointed 42 ships at him. No one answered. Not the Vanthi Empire, not the Fenari Federation, not any of the great powers that claim to protect the peace and order of this galaxy. No one. So humanity answered. We sent one ship through hostile territory to deliver aid. We were fired upon by a Vanthi fleet. We did not fire back. We completed our mission. The Kessi will survive. He leaned forward slightly. Let this be clear to every species, every empire, every government listening to this signal. Humanity does not seek war. We do not want your territory. We do not want your resources. We do not want to rule anyone. We will not turn away when the weak call for help. And we will not be stopped by anyone who tries to stand between us and those who need us. His voice dropped slightly. Not to a whisper, but to something more personal. Something that sounded less like a military broadcast and more like a promise. If you point your weapons at us, we will survive. If you try to block our path, we will go through. If you try to break us, you will fail. Not because we are the strongest, or the most advanced, or the most numerous, but because when we decide to do something right, nothing in this galaxy can make us stop. He paused one more time. Humanity stands with the Kessi. Humanity stands with anyone who needs help and has the courage to ask for it. That is who we are. That is who we will always be. He cut the broadcast. The bridge was quiet. Salmon wiped her eyes behind her round glasses. Taesun blew his nose loudly in the engine room, where he was listening on the intercom. Jisoo sat perfectly still, but his eyes were shining. Nari stood beside Do-hyun's chair and looked down at her captain. She did not smile, but her expression said everything a smile would have said and more. "Take us home, Somin," Do-hyun said softly. The Harang turned toward the stars. Its engines powered up, filling the space around it with a deep, steady hum. The Kessi on the ground looked up and watched the dark shape rise through their atmosphere and disappear into the sky. Across the galaxy, the broadcast was received. On Vanthi worlds, officers played it again and again and debated what it meant. On Fenari stations, diplomats listened in uncomfortable silence. On 100 other worlds, 100 other species heard the words of a human captain and felt something they could not quite name. On the Imperial Blade, which was still floating at its patrol position in Vanthi space, Admiral Tovin listened to the broadcast alone in his quarters. He listened to it 3 times. Then he sat in the dark for a long while and thought about what kind of galaxy he lived in, and what kind of galaxy he wanted to live in. He never spoke publicly about the encounter with the Hwarang. But in the years that followed, when the Vanthi Empire's policies towards smaller species began to change, when aid programs were quietly established, when the Empire's military doctrine shifted from conquest to protection, those who knew Tovin understood why. He had met a human, and the human had changed everything. The Hwarang arrived home 2 weeks later. There was no parade, no celebration, no speeches. The crew docked at the orbital station above Earth, filed their reports, and went home to their families. Do-hyun took 3 days of leave and spent them sleeping, eating his mother's cooking, and sitting in a park near his childhood home, watching the trees move in the wind. When he returned to duty, Nari was waiting for him at the dock. She had 2 cups of hot barley tea. She handed him one. "Ready for the next one?" she asked. Do-hyun took the tea and looked up at the stars. "Always," he said. And somewhere far away, on a planet covered in oceans, Kessi children ate their first full meal in weeks, and looked up at the sky, and wondered about the strange, stubborn, wonderful species that had come to save them from the dark.